Look at human history. It seems simple. Empires rise, empires fall. A linear path of progress. Or at least, that's what we usually believe. But today in this explainer, we are uncovering something that defies that logic entirely. You aren't just looking at a myth, you are looking at a survivor. A civilization that outlasted the ancient era, weathered the Middle Ages, and drove straight into the modern world without a single definitive end. We are looking at a relentless engine, one that has powered the longest continuous civilization on Earth.
5,000. Just let that sink in for a moment. That is how long this historical engine has been running. To truly grasp modern China, you have to wrap your head around the sheer, almost incomprehensible magnitude of time that has passed across those millennia. It's a scale of human existence that completely defies our normal understanding of history.
Because listen, this history wasn't just a peaceful, straight line of progress. No, it was a brutal, recurring engine. Think of it like a heavy, unstoppable pendulum. We are talking about monumental rises that build unimaginable wealth, followed by violent fractures that shatter society, and then inevitable rebirths, a continuous cycle of unparalleled prosperity, unthinkable bloodshed, and constant reinvention.
To understand this ancient historical engine, we have to go back to the very beginning.
We look back to early settlements facing total annihilation. The Yellow River was violently flooding, repeatedly wiping out everything in its path. Out of that severe, watery chaos stepped a legendary figure, Yu the engineer. He didn't conquer with a sword. He saved his people with an ingenious canal system. Because of that immense merit, Yu was named ruler, establishing an absolute core concept, the mandate of heaven. It states that ruling power isn't some unquestionable divine right. It's a conditional lease. Heaven grants power to the just and violently yanks it away from the wicked. Take Emperor Ji, the last ruler of Yu's bloodline. He was a corrupt, sadistic tyrant. Under the mandate of heaven, his hedonism signaled that heaven had completely rejected him. So when he was overthrown, it wasn't just a rebellion. It was an absolute, justified necessity.
But physical survival was only the first step. Next came a brutal war for human minds.
Jumping forward to 771 BCE, China entered an era of massive instability, feudal wars, constant blood in the streets. This was the Eastern Zhao period. But out of that chaos, two massive ideas emerged, fighting for control of human consciousness. On one side, you have Confucius. Despite witnessing horrifying things like live burials, he firmly believed humanity was naturally good and just needed to be nurtured. His vision was a massive, benevolent family, held together by respect and social harmony. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum was legalism. Legalists argued that people are inherently bad, selfish, highly dangerous. To them, the only way to hold society together was through strict laws and severe, fear-based control. This intense philosophical boxing match would soon dictate the fate of millions of lives.
And eventually, that philosophical debate was settled, not with words, but with unification through absolute fear.
The ideological war finally exploded during the Warring States period. 7 kingdoms, literally fighting to the death for absolute control. That chaos birthed Ying Zhang, a ruthless legalist driven to crush China into one single piece. But before he could unify the realm, he barely survived. A frantic assassination attempt unfolded, carried out by a man who hid a poisoned dagger inside a map. The king panicked, scrambled around a pillar, and just barely managed to stab the assassin. That botched attempt viscerally fueled Ying Zhang's paranoid crusade. He became Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor.
That brush with death built a terrifying legacy. His dynasty only lasted 15 years, but it fundamentally forged a unified cultural identity through absolute fear. He standardized currency and writing to force alignment. He forced peasants into severe labor to build the early Great Wall. Paralyzed by the fear of losing ideological control, he ordered mass book burnings to erase history. He buried 460 Confucian scholars alive to silence dissent. And he was so obsessed with conquering death itself, he drained his empire's resources to build a massive, silent terracotta army. Yet, in a wild, tragic twist of irony, his quest for eternal life is exactly what killed him. The first emperor died after drinking immortality potions that were heavily laced with mercury, a man who conquered the known world, ultimately defeated by his own desperate fear of the end.
With his death, the era of golden ages and foreign invasions began.
The historical pendulum swings rapidly again. The newly forged empire violently shatters and rebuilds. Let's trace this whiplash timeline. In 260 BCE, the Han Dynasty takes over, reviving Confucianism and opening the massive Silk Road. But then, inevitably, the empire fiercely shatters again into the bloody Three Kingdoms period. Fast forward to 581 CE, the Sui dynasty harshly forces the pieces back together through intense labor and military might. And that severe reunification paved the way for something truly incredible. In 618 CE, the Tang dynasty emerges as a massive, unparalleled new golden age.
The Tang dynasty was an era of unprecedented wealth, high art, stunning stability. Look at this number. 80 million. The population exploded to 80 million people, and its capital was arguably the most cosmopolitan city on the entire planet. What's amazing is how this connects to us today. If you walk into Chinatown and major Western cities right now, you might notice they are often formally called Tang People Street. That is how incredibly deep the legacy of this specific ancient golden age really goes.
But history never stays quiet for long. The pendulum swings back to darkness. How did this sophisticated state fall to nomadic horsemen from the harsh northern steppes? Enter Genghis Khan. I want you to process the scale of this for a second. 20 million dead. That is essentially the equivalent of wiping out the entire modern population of New York State. Genghis Khan forged an unimaginably powerful, disciplined killing machine out of sheer survival instinct, and he turned his ultimate focus to the wealth of the South.
This wasn't just traditional conquest. It was a grinding, multi-generational campaign of brilliant, ruthless psychological warfare. First, in 1211, Genghis breaches the Great Wall and sweeps the north. Then, his grandson Manke unleashes intense siege warfare on the heavily fortified south. Finally, in 1279, Kublai Khan finishes the job completely, securing the south and founding the Yuan dynasty. For the first time in history, foreign nomads governed a totally unified China.
But remember our core concept. The mandate of heaven does not care who you are. The Mongols eventually lost it, and it came with another horrifying number, 13 million. That's the estimated death toll in China from the bubonic plague in the 1330s. A catastrophic epidemic that, combined with severe famines and massive peasant uprisings, completely stripped the Mongol Yuan dynasty of their power in less than a century. The engine resets again.
This brings us to a devastating turning point. The century of humiliation.
The pendulum swings once more. After ethnic rulers reclaimed the throne and built the iconic modern Great Wall, they eventually fell to the Manchus, who established the Qing dynasty. And that set the stage for a catastrophic collision. The ancient historical engine slammed headfirst into the modern machine of European imperialism. On one side, you have a deeply conservative Qing dynasty trying to strictly limit trade, demanding only silver. On the other side, Great Britain, financially drowning, desperately craving Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. To reverse their massive trade imbalance, the British didn't negotiate. They aggressively bankrupted the Chinese economy by smuggling in millions of pounds of a highly addictive narcotic, opium.
When the Qing dynasty finally fought back by burning the opium, the First Opium War ignited. The industrially advanced British Navy easily crushed the Chinese forces. The result was the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, and the terms were devastating. The Qing were forced to pay 20 million pounds, hand over Hong Kong, open major ports, and perhaps worst of all, allow British citizens to totally ignore Chinese laws on Chinese soil. It was a catastrophic loss of sovereignty, the absolute beginning of the unequal treaties.
That extreme external humiliation triggered widespread chaos from within. In the mid-1800s, a village schoolteacher named Hong Shuquan suffered a complete nervous breakdown after failing his imperial exams. During a fever dream and after reading a Christian pamphlet, he became convinced that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. I know, it sounds unbelievable. But amidst the famine and the collapse of state authority, he militarized his fanatical cult into a massive, heavily armed rebellion. This sparked the Taiping Rebellion, and it led to this staggering number, 30 million dead. A horrifying civil war that nearly tore the Qing dynasty apart from the inside out. The engine of history, grinding lives into dust, fueled by internal trauma and exploited by external forces.
And so, we are left with the echoes of this brutal cycle.
We look back at a 5,000-year history of cyclical violence, of empires rising, fracturing, and being violently reborn. Which brings us to the final dramatic act of this explainer. What happens when the ancient mandate of heaven meets the modern world? For 5,000 years, China was an engine of internal rise and fracture. But that 19th century collision brought a century of external humiliation.
as European powers struck again and again, fracturing the empire like never before.
I want you to consider how that deep historical memory shaped everything. Thousands of years of cyclical violence. Compounded by severe foreign exploitation, it laid the unshakable groundwork for the unified, fiercely protective, global superpower we see today. The dynasties may have ended, but the echoes of those cycles are absolutely still ringing. This hidden history builds our present reality. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that shape our world.